Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's weekly current affairs programme. My name's Emma Webb, and this week, as usual, I'm joined by Senior Fellow and Historian Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Peter Whittle, the founder and director of the New Culture Forum, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, who's also a Senior Fellow here at the New Culture Forum. So before we kick off talking about universities and the madness that's been going on in the Treasury, and I don't mean the madness that everybody will be thinking of there, do you want to start, Peter, by telling us a bit about this book that we're publishing this week?
Absolutely, Emma. We're publishing this week. It will be available in a few days' time. If you would like to order a copy, here it is. Fighting Back, Defending Britain and the West in the Culture War. Now, we've already talked about it on this programme before, but here, my hot little hands, we actually have the book. I'm very pleased that these good people, Rafe, Emma, Philip, all contributed chapters to it. The point really about it, Emma, as you know, is that people are always getting onto us, quite rightly, saying we agree with you on almost everything or everything. But what do we do about it? So the point of this is that there's 9 essays. Apart from your good selves, we've got David Starkey, Konstantin Kisin, Calvin Robinson, Dr. Eric Kaufman, and they are all looking at various aspects of our society and how, in fact, we can fight back. And I think, the time is absolutely right. So far as I can see as well at the moment, this is the only book of its kind out, and so we're good timing here. But it's £10, and it will be available on Amazon. But in the meantime, if you'd like a copy, please do write. Just drop us an email at membership@newcultureforum.org.uk, or go to the website, or indeed there's the other one, which is contact@newcultureforum.org.uk. And what we will do is we will collate your requests and then obviously send you a copy. But I think we should all be very pleased with it, actually. You're dealing with immigration and multiculturalism.
And segregation.
And you're dealing with education, which is at the root of it all. And what was good about yours as well, what I noticed as well when we did the conference, is that your speech got this huge a number of views. It's like an everyday what. What should I do every day in my everyday conversation with people? And that's what people want to know.
Like the agony aunts response.
Yes, exactly. What should I do?
It kind of offers a strategy, doesn't it? And it isn't an emotional, visceral response, although there is an element of that. It's a cool intellectual. This is what you do in the face of this craziness, and this is the response, or this is advice which is useful. And I think that's really comforting for people, because our editor, brilliant editor Stephen Balog, called it a companion, didn't he? And I think it is a companion. Yeah.
I think people can often feel very disempowered as well, because when we talk about things like marching back through the institutions and all of these big things that need to be done in order to try and change the tide, and that can make people feel very small, as if there's nothing that really they as an individual can do. And I think the point of my speech at the conference, which has been reprinted as a chapter in this book, was to explain to people, firstly, that there is something that you can do in your daily life, that you're more powerful than you think you are, and secondly, and importantly, it takes and transforms Solzhenitsyn's own advice. And I think that's another point, is that there have been people who have been here before. Not to say that there's a direct comparison between our situation, what it was like to live under Soviet rule or under any other form of totalitarianism, but there have been people who have thought about these issues before, and have thought about how much power individuals really do have in their daily life.
I think the one thing we never ever lose sight of is that it's all very well, people have jobs, they have employers and they have to pay mortgages and things like that. However, to pick up your point, actually in a few days' time on the channel, we're going to be speaking to some quite well-known cases of people who were not originally well-known, became well-known simply because they fought back. I mean, a nurse, Amy Gallagher, we've got Harry Miller, famously obviously on the free speech front with the police, and then Nick Buckley, who was fired from his charity. So there are cases where people have actually said, you know what, enough. My dignity and freedom of speech is worth more to me than your job. So anyway, that's it. Fighting back, right? In all good websites at the moment.
So let's dig into this week's topics then, starting off with universities and this news story about the Quality Assurance Agency that has given certain guidance to universities to incorporate what we would call woke ideology into their curriculums.
Yes, so we have this Quality Assurance Agency, and most people, when they hear of such a society, will think, well, this is a decent, sound organisation that's there to provide the consumer with their stamp of approval. But what have they said? That schools, universities must teach the colonialism and white supremacy in fields like mathematics and science as well, for example. This is the proof that we all need to know that the revolution has already taken place. We are living in a post-revolutionary society, which is why books like this, Fighting Back, are all the more important. Because this is no longer about stopping the tide. The tide has already come in. This is about draining the swamp, to coin a phrase. And I think people need to really understand the terms of the battle that we are actually engaged in. It's one to recapture territory rather than to stop the invasion. There has been institutional capture, and we've seen it in the National Trust. We've seen it, as we'll discuss soon enough, in the Treasury as well. Every institution that we have now seems to have been overtaken by this ideology, and it's going to take a concerted effort by all parties. By parties, I mean all players and activists and people in the society as a whole, as well as in government, to try to reverse this, because it is a monumental task now, unfortunately.
Philip, you're at the coalface of this, aren't you? So what, in terms of what this would look like on the inside, you know, how you can imagine different subjects incorporating these things into their curriculums, because, you know, they don't have to listen to the Quality Assurance Agency, but presumably they will. So from your perspective on the coalface, you know, how do you see this sort of thing actually playing out?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to historicise it slightly, and I don't mean decades and decades and decades. I just mean over the last 10 years or so. And I think what's happened is, 10 years ago, this was beginning to be a very definite issue that ideology was overtaking everything. Now, it's always been left-wing and it's always been a bit crazy, but ideology was overtaking everything, okay? And that was in the drive to be multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. So you would have a theoretical framework over everything, and no matter what question you asked, you'd always come up with the same answer because you were framing it in a particular way. So that was one thing. But now we've gone further than that, and the language is much more emotive. Now it's framed in ethics. Okay, so everything you have to do has to be ethical. It would be anyway. If you're a coherent researcher, then you are by definition ethical because you're looking for the truth. Okay, but this is just pure ideology, and what they do is they present this incredibly radical ideology as an ethical framework. And if you don't engage with the ideology, then you're unethical, and therefore you're wicked. And that's how it works. So that's really what quality
and unprofessional.
Assurance. Yeah, and unprofessional. That's what quality assurance means. It means it means ideology, basically.
Peter?
Yes, no, I absolutely echo what Rafe and Philip said. I think the point actually Rafe makes is the right one, in the sense that, you know, there's this idea that, oh my God, what's happening? It has actually sort of happened. I mean, this quality assurance, you know, outfit is not even really official as such. It's not, you know, and apparently, in fact, the educational establishment is going to stop using it next year or something. But in a way, the damage is sort of done. I mean, people endlessly talk, you know, ask when it comes to things such as Long March to the institutions. You know, what was this, a conspiracy or something? Did people sit down in a room? No, I don't think they did. It's just, what's interesting is that if you think of people who are all in charge of all the institutions now. Look at the judges, look at everyone. They are all around about the same age. They're all around about the age which would mean that they were at university in the late 60s, which was when there was the new left were absolutely in control. In fact, the French have a term for it, the 68ers they called, the Soissons Huit, and they absolutely targeted them. So in fact, these are the chickens that are coming home to roost at the moment, basically.
I think there's just something more, and I think it just relates back to what I've said. I think you're absolutely right, but I think the change over the last 10 years, and maybe it's a bit longer. Okay, let's say it's the last 15 years. It's the manipulation of language, and the idea that saying one thing actually means something else. So the word quality here means something completely different to what it actually is. It's ideology. And that we've become so used to that. I think many people in education now have this kind of duality in their minds. We have this vocabulary that means something on the surface, but we know really it means something completely different. So we're working in these two ways all the time. And yeah, it's a cliche, but it's Orwellian, but it is really frightening.
Do you think people are getting fatigued by this as well? Because when I read this story, I sort of like, of course they're doing this, of course they're saying this. The idea that, you mentioned Orwell, but people have been joking about this for who knows how long, that eventually they'll be telling us that 2 + 2 = 5 and we'll have to believe it. And we've seen plenty of stories about them wanting to decolonize the maths curriculum and things like ethno-mathematics, which suggest there's no objective truth, or even somehow more insultingly that mathematics is something that is Western, that logic is Western, even though they're called Arabic numerals. So when I saw this story, I thought, well, of course, this is what they're suggesting. There's no surprise here. This is barely news. And I wonder whether people around the country, in the same way as I think the word woke is becoming a bit tired out itself, that people will now be seeing these stories and just sort of sighing and shutting the newspaper and thinking, I've had enough of this.
Yeah, and I can understand entirely why they would, but it's exactly the wrong thing to do, because you ain't seen nothing yet. This has just been the precursor. This is the prelude. It's almost like the phony war, right? In September 1939. The real stuff is just going to happen. We have waves of students graduating now who are going to become the leaders of tomorrow. We've just seen in recent polls 30% of people under 25 would support the monarchy only. 2/3 are opposed to the monarchy. 1 in 5 think Churchill was a good person. 4/5 don't think he was someone to be admired. This is coming in waves ahead. We're just seeing the ripples before the tidal wave, and we need to try to basically ensure that we don't get tired. We have to maintain the battle.
And sorry, Peter. And one thing we have to do is provide a platform and a space for the young people who do want to push back on it, because at the moment they are absolutely cowed and they're silent because they're frightened to speak. So
that's what we're going to be doing. That's what we're going to be doing next year, actually, without wishing to spoil any, spoiler alerts. But we will be hopefully doing that. But I think that the point I would make, which again we make these points a lot, is that people, you say, don't understand the magnitude, but they don't quite understand it. They still look at these things. You say, look at these stories about what is going on in universities, decolonized maths, decolonized computer science, all of this, and they don't actually get that this is a complete attack. The whole point is to undermine entirely all of these subjects, the foundations of our culture. That's what it is. And the way it's looked at is somehow that this is, come on, you've got to have balance in this thing. You've got to, it's like, with Churchill. When people talk about Churchill, they say, well, what's wrong in knowing the good and the bad? And we should, and then you can arrive to say, no, there's too much at stake now. That's not the reason they're doing it. That's not they're not doing it for balance. They're not doing it for our betterment or anything like that. They want to go right to the root of everything and basically delegitimize them. And it's working. It is absolutely working. Of course, you've got postmodernism to a great extent to blame for this. The idea that there's no such thing as truth.
There are some people who have, I think, maybe naively criticised these people by saying that what they're trying to teach in universities is anti-enlightenment, as if these people would take anti-enlightenment as being a criticism. Of course they're anti-enlightenment, they think the Enlightenment was racist and that's why it needs to be torn down. So all of these things to do with, you know, everything to do with objective truth, to do with the scientific method, Sir Francis Bacon, all of these fundamental things that have created the society that we now live in. I mean, we've only recently been talking about reparations for the Industrial Revolution, things like that. Everything that has built and created modern Britain, as you say, it's an active attempt to undermine those things, to suggest that at its very roots that there's something sort of structurally and systemically rotten about it. And so to criticise them, to say that they're anti-enlightenment, I think they just nod and say, yes, of course, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And that also means, just to very briefly finish my point, that what Rafe, you were saying about you know, the time bomb really of students going forward, is that we're also, it's not just simply that we're going to have masses of people who are steeped in ideology, it's also that we're going to have masses of people who are fundamentally uneducated, because they're not educated in the scientific method. They don't have the tools to seek truth, as you were saying earlier. They don't value objectivity, and they actually can't think clearly because they've only been taught, they've been to a sort of they've just been taught ideology. I was gonna really go hard there, but I won't.
I mean, one of the things I do, and I push back on it in the classroom. I always, when we're talking about postmodernism and truth and post-truth and subjective truth, I always think about the great Roger Scruton quote, where he says, you know, if someone's saying that you know, truth doesn't exist, the writer's saying that, they're asking you not to believe them, so don't, you know. And I think that's a really good starting point for young people, and then pushing back. The point is, we do have to push back, we do have to fight back, and that doesn't necessarily mean great big core celeb things. It's like you were saying in your chapter, it's small day-to-day things. It's actually saying no incrementally, I think, and I think that's really important.
Because the way we've got here is by saying yes, sure, okay, whatever, incrementally.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I can't take on the whole education establishment. You know, there are other people out there like me. I mean, Eric Kaufman's in there, and he, you know, he's of a similar persuasion. But you can push back intellectually. You can challenge these assumptions and these ideas, because they're just ideas and they're there to be knocked down. You know, but it is small. It is incremental. It's a day-to-day thing, as well as the other stuff, which is bigger.
Peter, I interrupted you.
We were talking about leaders. You were writing the Lion's Den recently.
Yes, well, everything you've just been discussing, I have now first-hand experience of, and it was a very sobering and depressing experience.
Welcome to my life, Ray.
Yes, well, you know, so I was at the Cambridge Union with Calvin Robinson. The Cambridge Union is the world's oldest debating society, 1815, the year of the Battle of Waterloo, and my gosh, we were there to discuss whether Britain should pay reparations for colonialism and slavery. So I sort of expected that we would be losing this debate prior to walking in there. Only debate I've ever lost in my life prior to this had been at the University of East Sussex, which is well known for attracting lefty loons. But Cambridge has always been a much fairer platform to have these discussions. But my gosh, it's one thing, you were talking about people being uneducated in the future, not having access to truth, or not knowing truth. It's fine to oppose opinion, but when people were audibly gasping and almost going into hysterics over well-known facts, I thought, gosh, the game is up. You know, just to point out the fact that that Africans were involved in slavery, and that as many Africans were kept in slavery in Africa as crossed over the Atlantic. My gosh, the shrieks. Just to point out the Islamic slave trade is centuries older than the British or American slave trade, and they just simply wouldn't accept it. And then when I pointed out that the British stopped Suti, the burning of Hindu widows on the funeral pyre, there were shakings of head. And if people go to the video, it's on our YouTube channel. There'll probably be a pop-up right now on the screen if you want to click on it, and it'll be the suggested video at the end of this program. You can see the reaction of the students, which is actually more interesting than my speech, to see the complete refusal to accept, because they're so indoctrinated And you can't really blame them because they have never once been told the other side of the story. It's not to say that, slavery was good, colonialism is 100% good, but there were benefits to colonialism, and Britain actually did play a vital role in leading the world against slavery, and yet they had never once, and these are Cambridge students, allegedly the very best that we can produce, and they actually thought that I was rewriting history, as one person said.
Actually looking at the audience, the young audience, a lot of foreign students in there, and I'm just wondering actually whether one of the incentives behind much of this is also the need to cater to non-British students coming in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely
the decolonisation thing, whether it's another kind of way.
So I just, before I say what I'm going to say, I just want to say how phenomenal I thought you were, Rafe, because it was magisterial. But I think we can probably play a quick clip from that.
Then again, why is the demand for reparations always focused and framed in terms of Britain? Why are no activists asking for reparations from the African states that were equally complicit in slavery? Should they not pay reparations? They provided the slaves that were transferred over the ocean, and millions more slaves were kept in slavery in Africa by other Africans, just as were being transported across the Atlantic. Why does nobody ever actually speak about that unpleasant truth? What about the Arabs and the Muslims who bought and sold African slaves for centuries before the British arrived and continued to do so into the 20th century until the British and the French tried to stop it? And indeed, what about the slavery that carries on today? The International Labour Organization says that currently approximately 7 in every 1,000 Africans is a slave. 10 million people. In 2017, CNN reported hundreds of slaves are sold every week in Libya. So much energy is given to historic reparations and the historic plight of slaves. I would have more time for the argument if the people actively pursuing that course of action were equally vocal about surely the far more horrendous plight of slaves today, where there are more slaves today in bondage, in slavery, than crossed over the Atlantic. So where are the protests outside the Nigerian High Commission? Where are the protests outside the embassies of Niger, which has 800,000 slaves today? What about Mali and Chad and Sudan and Cameroon? It's almost as if there's an ulterior motivation behind the call for apologies and reparations exclusively from Britain.
And one of the parts of this whole debate that I can't remember if this was in response to you or in response to Calvin, but one student actually stood up and said, we're Cambridge students, we don't need to be taught about this, or we don't, and as a former Cambridge student and member of the Cambridge Union, I wasn't just horrified by that, I was also embarrassed. I actually felt embarrassed by association, because the sort of the arrogance, the hubris, and this just lack of intellectual humility, the basic intellectual humility that is required for you to be able to learn anything. Why would you listen to somebody who prefaces what they say with something like that?
I think there's something there about the lack of self-awareness, and that lack of self-awareness sets up the ridiculous emotional response that you were seeing, because it isn't what you're saying, it's the speaker, isn't it? And it's the identity of the speaker defines completely their response to what's happening. So if they identify with the speaker and I'd say they love the speaker for their characteristics, then that's all well and good. But the idea that facts get in the way is they just cannot, and it's not just young people, it's older people as well. I'm not just having a go at young people here. People cannot deal with facts because they cannot separate the emotional and the intellectual, because that's the other thing that's happened. This idea of my subjective experience, my subjectivity is the most important thing. Emotion has really sullied all of this thing, and it's completely confused the intellectual space, intellectual life. But of course, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to have.
The most dangerous combination to have, particularly amongst academics or young students, is a lack of education combined with arrogance and a confidence and a certainty that you're right, combined with righteousness. That is a toxic combination. There is no way. Essentially, it's cult brainwashing. Essentially, when you combine all of those elements together, and you're absolutely right.
What was it? Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've also got a culture where many kids are no longer actually told no. They're no longer actually disciplined. That has an effect on the mind. You can see it happening at the lowest level. Children are, absolutely allowed to do whatever they want to do. They're not used to being criticised, certainly not on social media, all of this.
We've also seen the disempowerment as well of the academics, so that the students feel that they are in charge and can bully the academics into, because the university's a business, right? They want to get what they're paying for.
Well, they are the model. The model fits that.
And so they'll do anything that the students want them to. So they so used to getting pandered to. But
there's also just the basic lack of common respect and decency. The Cambridge Union, Oxford Union, which I've been debated at before, were always places which had respect, would listen in respectful silence to you before having their opportunity to respond. And it was the complete lack of that. It was this sense of superiority, the sense that they knew better, which was remarkable to see. I debated at the Cambridge Union last 7 years ago, and I can tell you 7 years ago I would have had a very different reception, and that's what's so scary. 7 years isn't a long time, and things have changed so much just in that brief period. I can only imagine what it would be like to be there in 2030 and have the same debate.
Everything's linked, isn't it? So if you think about how the working class are treated now, with utter condescension and real hate by these people. If you think about what happened with Brexit, for example, it was just gammon and all of those things. There is a real hatred, a snobbish hatred, which comes out of this ideology, and it's, to say it's distasteful is the understatement of the year, isn't it? But
well, they're actually a block.
Yeah.
Working class people are a block to the progress they see in their eyes. They are the ones who remain patriotic. They are the ones who generally will go and cheer the Queen or the King. They are generally the ones who worry about migration. They were the common enemy you needed with which to define multiculturalism, actually. And that's what was needed. And
it just goes to show, doesn't it, how we've gone back, because now universities are enclaves of the chattering class, and we've spent, well, since 1945 and since student grants and the Reconstruction and all of those things, we worked to change that, and now pretty much we're back to where we started.
Rafe, I want to ask you.
I should say, actually, just on that point though, what we also are seeing though is a lot of people coming in from comprehensive. So right now, if you've gone to Eton, I know people who have difficulty getting their children into universities now, because the universities are now deliberately biased against private schools, and are bringing in comprehensive schools. And what I noticed at the Cambridge Union was actually a lot of people coming in who weren't privileged or from the upper classes, but they were wholly ignorant. They weren't as qualified because of this desire to bring in people from comprehensive schools and to meet ethnic minority quotas and so forth. People were coming in. I could see the standard of students was much lower than 7 years ago.
I'm certainly not talking about the upper classes. No. I'm talking about the chattering classes.
But my point is, that's another big issue, is people at university there's a much lower standard of intelligence, I would actually say, than there was 7 years ago. And I could really see that in the audience.
That ties in with what I was going to ask you, which is, obviously when you go to debate at one of these places, your interaction with the audience is not just while you're in front of them debating, but you have other interactions as well along the way. What was your sort of experience, your feeling of the students, the interactions that you had with them?
Well, the few interactions I had, because most people automatically cleared a wide berth between Calvin and myself, whereas there was this almost sort of like, Bobby Moore in 66 for the other side, going around.
Who were the other side?
It was Bell something or other, MP, my mother's MP actually, my parents' MP, and a professor from SOAS, obviously goes without saying what the opinion will be there, who was quoting Marxist historians on slavery, and I thought, well, that just tells you everything you need to know there. But it was arrogant. I mean, you said that this one woman stood up and said, as Cambridge students, we know our history, we don't need to hear about history. The same woman stopped me on the street the next day when she bumped into me in Cambridge and she said, "Oh, interesting speech, despite all the inaccuracies in it." And I thought, my God, you are a 20-year-old student, probably studying, leisure studies or something, and yet you are deigning to actually just dismiss facts, which are actually everything I said was easily verifiable. And it's that disdain, that sense of superiority I was talking about before, and that lack of civility, and the lack of ability to say, well, a good debate, we're on different sides, as you would have done in the old days, and just shake hands.
God help anyone who employs these people.
I mean, it's a shameless plug here, but it's everything I talk about in my Heresies film, isn't it? The war on history. It's completely the war on history.
So shall we move on to a related subject, which is the as I mentioned in my introduction, the madness in the Treasury, not in relation to the awful autumn statement that we saw last week, but actually this news story about the 6% quota, 6% target for Black British people within the Treasury, which was pointed out by the Telegraph, is far above the proportion of the population. Is only 3% of the population are Black British, according to the 2011 census. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it just this is all about equity, isn't it? Yeah. You hear this word equity. We used to hear equality, but basically equity, you could describe it as being about equality of outcome. That's how I see it. In other words, they look at the thing and they say, right, okay, our population is this, that and this. Here we have the Treasury, or whatever else, if you like, the police, or whatever else it is. How come it's only at that percentage or that percentage? The idea that it's about any kind of merit or people who are best for the job is neither here nor there. In other words, they've just got to get those quotas up. But the thing with the Treasury, I don't know, this 3%, that seems low to me. I mean,
well, that's from the 2011 census.
Yeah,
but
these things are always underestimated,
so
on purpose.
The MP, Ben Bradley, I think it was him who said this, and I agreed with him, was that if you were to hire people on merit alone, it wouldn't be objectionable to have, say, 50% of the people in the Treasury to be Black British if they were being hired just purely on merit. And it's almost insulting to suggest that you should have to do this sort of affirmative action to reach a certain percentage in order to, rather than just hiring people on the basis of their qualifications. And that under the current circumstances, with the economy the way that it is, that even more so the Treasury should be focusing its hiring on those people who are most qualified to do that role. But instead they're taking this frankly insulting approach of just trying to hire people on the basis of their biological characteristics rather than their qualifications.
And it's worse than that, because they're actually exceeding the percentages in the population. And I wondered what was going to happen when we actually reach the levels that they are actually in the population. And now we've seen, I mean, you could there's just no defence to it. There's no defence for doubling. What they've said is, oh, well, because the Treasury is based in London and ethnic minorities make up a greater proportion of London's population, we can justify having more ethnic minorities working for the Treasury than they should be allocated based on a national population. I don't buy that. I also don't buy it because you are drawing from a much smaller pool, because of the very fact that people have come over from overseas in recent years. They aren't actually found higher up in the social hierarchies, in the career hierarchies. So you're actually drawing that 6% from a tiny pool compared to the rest of the population. And so the quality that you're going to get from that tiny pool, because most Black people coming over, for example, are still working in low-skilled industries because they've come from Africa and elsewhere, and they're not second generation, not third generation, so they haven't actually been able to get the education that they need. So we're actually depriving our civil service of some of the great minds that you used to have with the fast-track stream.
And the modelling, of course, is just stupid as well. So you've already talked about, you know, they play these tricks fast and loose, don't they, with the facts. So they'll say something like, well, he's based in London and there's a higher percentage of ethnic minorities in London, so we need a higher percentage. And they'll also do something, bringing back to Peter's point about equity, they'll say something like, well, ethnic minorities have had a difficult time in life, they've been held back, so we need to even that out by having a greater percentage of minorities to give them more of a chance. What they won't say, and that's just based on the colour of their skin, but what they won't do is the same thing with, say, white working class boys. And we know that they really are held back, you know, in education, but it's so selective, and it's just, I mean, the only word you can use to describe it is actually racist. That's what it is. It's racist.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And social engineering.
And social engineering.
Complete social engineering.
But we know, for example, also that if you are slim and attractive, you are more likely to get a job in an interview, right? So what about? And this is not a job offer from myself. I'm not looking for. But the point is that not next logically, right? What about all of the fat, unattractive people who've been disadvantaged? Don't they deserve a job in the Treasury as well, because they have had decades, if not centuries, of exclusion from these corridors of power? No, you know, that's the obvious next step in all of this, isn't it?
Quotas to counter systemic fat phobia.
Some institutions also are hugely disproportionate. I mean, like the BBC is a good example in terms of ethnicity and ethnic minorities. It's hugely disproportionate to the population at large. So I mean, I think that that is sort of like the reason they give. I think that this is all again part of somehow pandering to an idea that somehow we are not exactly evil, but that we are to blame for these things. We are to blame for this, right? And that's behind it all.
The part of the reason why those institutions are systemically bad is because there are too many white British people in them.
I remember people when I was in City Hall. I remember people walking around and you know, talking about their privilege. And I was still at the stage, you know, God, like naive, I guess, still at the stage where I think the only time you could really bring that up was to be mocking, or to, you know, it must be comedy in some way, but it wasn't. They would say, you know, you'd see these two kind of white beta guys, middle class beta kind of guys in the lift, one saying, well, I am aware of my privilege in this situation. And you sort of want to burst out laughing. But it's throughout the whole place.
And it's gone further. So people will, you know, it used to be, you know, speaking as a white man or speaking as a black, or whatever it is now, it's people, I've seen quite a few people do this, you know. I'm unlearning racism, and then talking about what they're going to talk about. So they, you know, they present themselves. I'm doing the work. I'm unlearning racism out of the blue, you know, from nowhere.
These sound like the.
And then they'll talk about the quota for the kitchen towels.
Phrases like that actually sound like the sort of. They're almost religious phrases, aren't they? To be doing the work, the sorts of things that people come out with. These are. Sort of learned set phrases that signal something.
Self-flagellation.
And
self-flagellation.
When, as you know, you were saying, Peter, about these people talking about their privilege, that this this announcement from the Treasury, and it seems that there are other departments in the government are doing similar things, came during Black History Month, and this was obviously a sort of announcement of it's Black History Month. Here are the things that we're doing in order to counter racial prejudice within the Treasury. That's not what it said, but this is the gist. So I think, going back to what you were saying in relation to universities, Philip, that this has become ethics. This has become, you know, this is the Treasury's way of signalling that we're not just saying these things, we're also doing them. And I think these things end up in the news, but I very much expect that the people who have come up with these ideas didn't expect there to be any backlash in response.
The problem here is we've had 12 years of Conservative government, right? And the beauty of the parliamentary system was always that you had allegedly a democratic dictatorship. Parliament with a majority was able to do anything that it wanted to do. It could abolish the monarchy. It had limitless power. So how on earth has a Conservative government allowed this state of affairs to develop, not only within the Treasury, we know there are similar things within Parliament itself. You know, if you can't sort out your own house, literally, how can you effectively govern the country? There's almost like a Jordan Peterson expression right there. This is the problem. The takeover, the institutional takeover is in our government departments, and it's in government. The buildings look the same on Whittle, where there are cuckoos in the nest.
This goes back to what we were saying about this undermining of the Enlightenment as well, because whether you're in the Labour Party or in the Conservative Party, if you are in the the elite echelons of anywhere on the political spectrum, that what you get is this fundamentally anti-Enlightenment thinking, which and this idea of having quotas, of affirmative action, is an undermining of Enlightenment thinking, because if you were returning to the roots of the Enlightenment and the logic that follows from that, you would base everything would be a meritocracy. You would base things on people's expertise, and you wouldn't assume therefore that if you didn't, that you would have less people from ethnic minorities in those roles, because you wouldn't be assuming that those individuals were so. All of these things are tied in with each other.
Well, they are. I mean, look, in some ways, that there is nothing new under the sun. It's become much more intense. Only about 15 years ago, do you remember there was a guy called Greg Dyke, and he was Director General of the BBC. Used to be at ITV before that. He became quite famous for this phrase. He said, "Well, the problem with the BBC is it's hideously white." Right? And I remember seeing someone at the proms a few years later. One of the commentators at the proms say, "Oh, look, this is hideously white." Sort of went past like, okay, you can say this is too white if you want, but why hideously? What's this hideously? I mean, no one would say, Brixton as it used to be is hideously black. No one would dream of saying that, but somehow it's just kind of innate. This is wrong. To say hideously white shows a level of self-loathing that is taken for granted.
But I think they take
for granted.
I think there's a delight in it, though. I think people who, like, if you remember Jon Snow saying he'd never seen more white people in his life. I can't remember exactly the context, but something to do with Brexit.
It was a Brexit march through Whittle.
I think that these people take
to
a
Glastonbury.
Yeah.
I think they take a delight in it, because I'm not one of them. I'm not one of the hoi polloi. They're trying to find themselves on the right side of where they see history going.
Just to tie it all together,
history is just middle class opinion.
Yeah, sorry, chattering class.
It's just
opinion.
middle class opinion. Everyone's using this expression at the moment.
But just to tie it all together, the government obsessed with quotas, the BBC obsessed with colour, education obsessed with colonialism. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. The government should be dealing with policy. The BBC should be entertaining. Education should be about subjects and disciplines. It's what I said before. All that stuff is going out of the way, and people don't know anything. All they know is how many black people are here? How many white people are here? What's our relationship? What's the power relationship here? How can we deconstruct these narratives? But they've never read Shakespeare.
They're not equipped properly.
They're not equipped to do anything else, and they're not actually, in terms of learning and research and in terms of methodology, they don't know any of that stuff other than this particular thing, which is postmodernism and gobbledygook.
That's the first thing that has to be done, isn't it? That you have to purge young minds in order for the new way of thinking to have some blank slate to settle on. But actually, if
things rather than ideology.
People have got to also. I think people have got to. They've just got to wake up. I mean, for example, in the school scenario, what they're being taught in schools. We did that great program with Calvin. It's pretty much in the news all the time now, actually, about what's being taught in schools. But just anecdotal evidence, from my own family, the mothers, for example, at the school gate, they will say, "What's wrong with a trans, drag queen doing a story? What's wrong? What's your problem with it? This is. I've heard these things. They've got to wake up at the moment. That they just don't understand what's going on."
Well, that's an interesting note to end on. We've gone all the way full circle to drag queens. Thank you so much, Rafe. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Philip. And thank you for watching. Please comment below. Let us know what you think of the subjects that we've discussed today, and we will see you next time on Newspeak.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below, or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.